Hello, my name is Dina Poblete, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement at Connecticut College. I'm joined here by Barb Sedoric, class of 1979, and President and Founder of Lasting Matters. We also have with us today Laura Becker, Director of Gift Planning at Connecticut College. Today we will be discussing the importance of end-of-life planning and some guidelines to follow when organizing your intentions. We're going to first start with some personal introductions, and then we'll dive in. Barb, why don't you tell us about your background and your path since Con?
I'm happy to do so. After graduating from Connecticut College in 1979 with a child development degree, I decided I wasn't going to teach, but I was interested in law. So I went to the Institute for Paralegal Training, which is in Philadelphia, and entered into a certification for estates and trusts paralegal, and was eventually hired in Boston by Foley, Hoag & Elliott. I worked for 7 or 8 years for 4 estate attorneys. Part of my job was I often visited widows' houses, which I call the scavenger hunt for court inventories, to find out what their assets were, what they had, where things were located. And that experience, I often saw families in a state of chaos with having made no decisions, siblings fighting, and the complexity of blended families all sort of rolled up into one. And that sort of stuck with me through the years. I come from 3 generations of financial advisors, and I'm married to a fiduciary, so planning for all the what-ifs is kind of in my DNA.
Great, thank you. Laura, do you want to tell us about your background and role at the college?
Thank you, Dina. So as Director of Gift Planning at Connecticut College, I work with individuals who are interested in leaving the college and their estate plans. And I also work with all of the trust and estates work once the gifts are coming to Con from estates. I started at Connecticut College in April of 2019, and coming previously from Yale University in their development office for many years. I'm also on the board of the Plant Giving Group of Connecticut. And I just love working with individuals to speak with them about how they can leave their legacy at Connecticut College.
Great, thank you. So that kind of brings us to the meat of the conversation. Barb, do you want to maybe talk to us a little bit about Lasting Matters and why you started it? You know, was there a moment when you knew that this was your path and something that would be so meaningful to your audience?
Yes, I would love to tell you a little bit about it. So, as I said before, I often witnessed chaos and indecision after the death of a client's spouse in the legal world. And, I remember going to their homes and looking through file cabinets and attics and basements and just looking for information. It's a time of grief. It's a time of confusion. It's a very sad time for families. And so that stuck with me. But I would say what sort of pushed me over the edge to create Lasting Matters was my mother died suddenly on a sunny morning in May of 2006. And honestly, the shock of that and the experience I had within my own family of dealing with the death of someone really illuminated the gap in the conversations that we had never had. I never talked to my mom about what she would have wanted for her service. And honestly, believe it or not, planning a funeral is a lot like planning a wedding. It has all the same components and ingredients. Who's invited, where's it going to be, what the food is, what's the music, flowers, sort of all those things. But with a funeral, you have a few days to plan, and with a wedding, you have a year. So you're sort of thrown into these mountains of tasks immediately after somebody dies. And I was just sad that I had never had those conversations with my mother. That would have made it easier. We tried to do our best to honor her. So that was just sort of a piece of why Lasting Matters came about. I turned to my father and I said, look, Dad, when you pass away, I don't want to experience the same thing. I want to know what you have. I want to know where it's located. I want to know what your wishes are, your intentions. So I started asking him lots of questions. And then I started interviewing lots of my friends who'd either lost a parent or a spouse or even a child. And I boiled it down to pretty much, what do you wish you had known before they died that would have saved you time, money, stress, and family discourse? And I started compiling it all, and I started researching, and I spent 4 years trying to create an organizer, which was the end result. That wouldn't be morbid or morose. It was more practical guidance, but it is the nuts and bolts of everybody's individual life. Each of us carries around a lot of information that nobody else knows. I mean, if you just think about your passwords and digital life, it's a daunting task. And if you don't know your husband's business computer access and you have a business that you're taking over, potentially, at least the care of, those are things that you need to know. So I just really understood that, the death and taxes is like 100% sure. And there's no time like the present to plan, because it's not age related. It really is. You don't know when this is going to happen. And all of those little details will help your family when and if you can't speak for yourself or they can't get answers anymore. So that's what I did. I just put all that information in and found somebody to, brand it and make something that was easy to do and could be revisited.
I love your organizer.
Oh,
I think it's amazing. And I'm definitely going to use it for myself and give it to my parents.
Yes, because it isn't about just sort of the 80s and 90s. It really pertains to people that have young families, or it doesn't really matter, even if you're single and you have assets or you have wishes, but somebody else needs that information when something happens to you. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to relieve a lot of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
Makes sense. So with that said, what are some of the questions that you do that are so important to ask when planning for a family member's death, or even to think about when planning for your own?
So I would probably say the first thing that's most important is picking a point person. And maybe picking one person and having a plan B if the point person is unable to later on in life. The most important thing, I think, is the location. Where are people going to find things? Which is why I created the organizer, so they can find at least breadcrumbs to all of those things: bank accounts, land in Idaho, whether you have a wine cellar. It just sort of covers everything. So I think where things are located is really important. The first chapter of the organizer is about immediate matters. Who's going to be notified? What family and friends are important? Who's the estate attorney, the fiduciary, the accountant? Are you going to have an autopsy? Because you have to have, if you want an autopsy, then that's something obviously you have to do before you make a decision, whether to cremate somebody or not. Another big decision that I saw actually a lot of sadness around was whether you want to be buried or cremated, because there's nothing worse than going through your parents' drawers and finding a file that says, I wish to be cremated with my ashes spread at all of these favorite places, yet nobody knew that, so they buried mom. you can't undo those things. So that's a really important thing to communicate.
Right.
A funeral or a memorial service. One is usually done right after somebody passes away. A memorial service is something that you can extend on into the future. We're seeing a lot of that now with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, Zoom funerals or how do you gather people? But those decisions, if you can make it, it helps your family. You can also plan your own funeral. I have known people to have, had medical issues that were terminal, and they filled out the organizer, and they were able to share with family members, this is what they wanted. They wanted a cocktail party.
Right.
Friends. They didn't want a big, Catholic mass. So whatever it was, it makes it very personal.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I also recommend doing is writing a draft of your own obituary. Because to me, when we went to write my mother's, it was sort of like doing an AP history exam, but you didn't have all the information. So you have to look through, what school and what organizations, and craft something that felt like you were honoring a parent. So when you write your own and it has all of the biographical data, it just takes that stress away from family members too.
Right.
So those are just a few things. And I also think people need to, it's a great thing to think about legacy planning. Like, what is your legacy? What do you want to leave behind? And that applies to what you're talking about, Laura, with Connecticut College.
Mm-hmm.
So there are conversations that should be had. And there's no time like the present that to have the conversations, but also write it down.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody knows what the specifics are and what you're thinking, and you can change it.
Right. You can always revisit it. So that is a good segue into Laura, all of what Barb has shared with us. How does this relate to the ways in which you work with alumni and friends of the college when, talking about their estate plans and their legacy?
Yeah, so I can share more just from general what charities hope.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very important. And of course, my experience is at Connecticut College and other places, but we want to encourage individuals to share their plans with us while they're living.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very important. We want to thank people and recognize them and ensure that the way that they're hoping, a charitable distribution from their estate will be used.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to have those conversations now and say, what are you hoping to achieve by this ultimate gift? And we really do recognize that this is a very special gift, and it's one that is an important decision that individuals are making. We also recognize that many times these decisions are what we say revocable, so you can change your mind at any time. So we want to make sure that we, are constantly engaging, our friends and alumni of the college. And we've received some, just personally at Connecticut College, we've received some amazing estates in recent years, and we never knew that they were coming. And it just seemed very unfortunate, because it would have been such a wonderful way to thank individuals while they were living.
Mm-hmm.
And so if individuals have, estate plans, we do encourage, any charity encourages you to share those plans with the charity. The other thing that I will say is we can also work with you or your financial advisor to determine the best way to leave a gift from your estate, whether it be naming a dollar amount or percentage in your will, or it could be a retirement plan beneficiary designation. It could be a beneficiary designation from a bank account. There's a lot of different ways to leave an estate gift. Mm-hmm. So in my role, I do work with planners, individuals, attorneys, to determine what is the best structure for them.
Great.
I'm a big proponent for communicating those things, but also there's a lot of joy if maybe towards the end of somebody's life, if they have something in their estate plan, maybe they actually want to do it now and give it while they're alive, and then reap some kind of there's always giving always gives back, so reap some sort of
absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Really
right. So, Barb, at what age do you suggest writing the first version of your will?
Well, I honestly think that once you have left college or graduate school or whatever, that's probably the first time, if you have some assets in particular, you should start thinking about having a will. Mm-hmm. That's sort of when you're an adult and you're launching. So that would probably be the first time I would suggest having a written will, unless you are younger and you actually have a lot of assets and you have maybe specific wishes for what happens. Mm-hmm. That, and particularly possessions. Like if you have a guitar collection that is very valuable, maybe you have something very specific. But other than that, I also think that when you get married, or when you have your first child, or some major event like that. Mm-hmm. But that's not to say that if you're single without children and a partner, that you shouldn't also do it. So I think sort of in your later mid to late 20s is a good time. Mm-hmm. It's something to visit all along your lifetime. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I should probably jump on that. So then in addition to that, I guess, how often do you think somebody should revisit their will and planning documents? You mentioned some of the life moments that should trigger additional review, but maybe anything to add to that?
Well, yes, certainly, getting married, the birth of a child, divorce, very important.
Right.
To revisit and redo your estate plan. I actually know somebody who was in the middle of a divorce and her soon-to-be ex-husband died, and so she got a widow versus an ex-spouse, and so the responsibilities were very different and shifted in how the state works with possessions, etc. So the death of a spouse or a partner often triggers redoing, and you should redo your estate plan. If you inherit a significant amount, that's a time, or any kind of maybe significant change in a financial status, you should revisit. And I highly recommend working, I call it sort of a trifecta, working with an estate attorney, a fiduciary, a financial advisor, and an accountant. The three should be communicating with each other about your wishes and your life plan.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as the items most commonly forgotten or missed in clients' end of life planning?
Wow. I think one of the big ones is choosing a person who's going to be in charge. If you leave it and you've got 5 siblings, often there's discourse and disagreement and nothing gets done. I heard stories, honestly, in the interviews that I had, stories of, people not knowing where to put mom's ashes. So mom's ashes are still in the basement after 15 years because this don't decide. So having a point person who's going to carry out your wishes, or hopefully, is very important. I talk about 3Ds, sort of documents, decisions, and details. Everybody's pretty good at the document part, getting an estate plan in place, but making these other decisions are, whether you want a funeral or a memorial service or cremation or burial, those kind of decisions, or, you're going to donate organs.
Right.
Those are all things that are often forgotten or they're not talked about. Creating a list of your digital life, your passwords, your computer access, your frequent flyer miles, believe it or not, points and credit cards and all that thing. All those details matter. Succession planning for business owners. You can't believe how many people do not have a succession plan. And when the CEO or point person dies, it's a business owner, it creates a big mess behind. So I also think healthcare proxies are important. Having your making those decisions. Do not resuscitate and what your implications are. I think that has become illuminated by COVID-19. You need to have those wishes written down so that when and if you are hospitalized, people know what you want. Otherwise, their job is to keep you alive, and maybe you don't want that kind of life.
Right.
That's really important. And then possessions and belongings. You have no idea how many people fight over possessions, especially in blended families. That was mom's, no, that was dad's, or, he said I could have this. And I heard people making off with pieces of artwork during, visiting hours or something, and siblings. And so I heard a lot of sort of miserable stories about that. So I often recommend that people write down a list, like let's say you have even family jewelry or your wedding rings or, something very personal. If you write it down and say, this is who I would like to have it and why, or maybe some history behind it, most often people will honor those wishes. Versus trying to guess. Mom said this. No, she didn't. Those are all. That's why I created Less Matters, because there was always the talk about documents, having a will, having a trust, what's happening there, but sort of all the little details about what you want. If somebody doesn't know what those are, you're leaving behind potential discourse. So,
right. It's unfortunate that it can lead to, horrific arguments. And
think about people that have second homes or summer houses, the emotional attachment that they have, and then generations that come down, and maybe they're originally your grandfather owned a house on a lake, and then it went to the 3 brothers, and then they each have 4 kids, and then it goes down, and everybody's emotionally attached. So
right.
often I would recommend actually selling the property unless you can really work it out, because it isn't always pretty in divvying up things.
Right.
And what happens to pets? You guys have dogs?
Yes.
Yes.
So if you love your animals, it's also really nice to write down what would happen to your pets if something happened to you.
Wow.
That's right.
If they're important to you.
Right.
Yeah.
This whole process, Barb, just kind of makes it seem like as you're going through it, it's such a probably reflective and cathartic experience just to think about your life and all of the things that, from ownership to legacy. And once it's complete, I can imagine that individuals feel immensely relieved
Yes.
this part of their planning is settled, at least, as it is that day.
Right.
It must feel great to be in that place.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that personally because I don't have those details documented in the way that I probably should.
Yeah. And you know what? There's people say, well, it's a daunting task. And I guess my response is yes, it is. However, you can take pieces of it.
Right.
Do pieces of it. Don't overwhelm yourself. Eat in pencil. Other than your biographical data doesn't change, but everything else can change. I think I've revisited my father's, because he's still alive at 89. We still revisit his wishes and have those conversations. And I often show people like a picture of me and my dad and say, so who do you think is going to die first? And they all point to him because he's older. And I said, that's not a guarantee. There's no guarantee in the order of what things happen. So I have mine filled out so that my family knows what I want. And I revisit it like do your taxes. You got to go through your stuff. Once you do it, and then you revisit it, and you could just sort of say, I don't really want that anymore, and put it in pencil. So,
Laura, what are the types of questions charities typically receive from individuals who are interested in leaving them in their estate plans?
Sure. So, we get a lot of requests to provide suggested language for individuals to leave in their will or living trust. Which we're happy to speak with individuals about. We do have suggested language that the college prefers, as do all of the other charities out there. So, we want to have that conversation with people and just to kind of review it and say, hey, what do you think of this? And, I think that probably one of the things that I just want to get across to everybody in this conversation is that, professionals who work in these fields, such as myself, Barb, estate attorneys, we are very comfortable with having these conversations with people, but we appreciate and understand that not everybody has that same comfort level when they're talking about their end of life plans. And we are very respectful of that. And we want others to feel comfortable in reaching out to us in the first place and saying, let's have this relationship. That is incredibly important just to get the message across that, we want to have that relationship with you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And the conversations get easier the more you have them.
Yes. And I know that there's some people who are in their 80s, plus who don't have any estate plan. And I don't know if that's out of fear or, just not wanting to go through the process. But I hope that this encourages others to start thinking about that in sooner rather than later.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This conversation is certainly very enlightening, of course, amid so much uncertainty in the world today with COVID. It's an extremely important and relevant topic. Lastly, I just want to ask Barb or Laura if you have any final words of wisdom for our audience.
Well, I will say two things. One is that unfortunately the death rate is 100%. That's not something we're all miss out on in life. So planning for it is something that should be done thoughtfully and often. Having conversations will help your families navigate in a very stressful and sad time after you pass away. So I think it's the greatest gift, giving the gift of information when it matters the most. And it's never too early to start because when that person dies, you will not have answers, and you won't have guidance. So have the conversations. If you don't want to have the conversations, still fill out an organizer and let somebody know that you've done it. And that's what I hope, I wish you all the best. Stay healthy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barb.